heard quite some time ago that all works of fiction must start with someone breaking one of the 10 Commandments. Or maybe it was committing one of the 7 deadly sins. Whichever, that event occurs before the mystery novel begins, and that sin provides the motivation for someone breaking the 6th commandment. We, the readers, don't learn about that sin until near the end of the book. Indeed, in the end is the beginning. I know you are familiar with the scene. The detective assembles all the suspects into the parlor, where he or she explains the why, the how, and most important, the who. The accused instantly admits to all and never says, "I won't say a word until I've spoken with my lawyer." The end. In the story we heard as the reading this morning, the investigator was Yahweh himself. Having a very limited number of suspects to choose from, he accuses Cain, who doesn't confess, but claims no responsibility and goes into exile. We, the reader, have already learned the why of this murder. Cain has committed a deadly sin, envy. Maybe Yahweh was satisfied with that outcome, but was man's justice truly served? We will return to the concept of justice a bit later. I started reading mystery novels many years ago in my teens. Naturally, my taste has changed over the years. I no longer read Nancy Drew, and I haven't read an Agatha Christie in many years. I now prefer novels that are more realistic and have more literary merit. However, I still enjoy the challenge of trying to determine the who, how, and why. Modern technology and electronic devices have brought about a change in mysteries and spy thrillers. Imagine James Bond with a cell phone, or Hercule Poirot with DNA testing available. There is also a new openness about sex, less inhibition in describing murder scenes, and, for our focus this morning, a different treatment of religion in this more secular age. Earlier mystery novels gave deference to religious beliefs, while fiction today, especially mystery novels, seem to present the devout as suspects or being mentally deranged. Read Henning Man Kills Before the Frost or Camille Lackberg's The Preacher for examples of this trend. However, I still find in many mysteries written today opportunities to explore some common theological concepts. We can summarize the history and development of the genre briefly. Edgar Allan Poe has been given credit for creating the detective fiction genre with his short stories featuring Auguste Dupin, published in 1841 and 1842. Poe's detective uses reason and logic to solve these crimes. Shortly after, Dickens gave us one of literature's most memorable detectives in his Inspector Bucket and Bleak House, 1852. And we were introduced to Wilkie Collins' Sergeant Cuff in The Moonstone in 1868. Between the two wars, the mystery novel became recognized as a fiction genre and became very popular reading. This was considered to be the golden age of the British mystery, with its largely English cozy mysteries, typified by the novels of Agatha Christie, who remains one of the few writers of that period whose novels are still published and read today. I always think of British cozies as having a little arsenic in the elderberry wine or sprinkled on the crumpets. The golden age of detective fiction in the United States featured hard-boiled mysteries, called that because of the characters of the private detectives, created by Dashiell Hammett, Ross MacDonald, Raymond Chandler, and their followers. Novels of that period were not particularly realistic, were plot-driven rather than character-driven, and deserved to be called whodunits. P.D. James, born in 1920, describes in her book, talking about detective fiction, the world of her childhood as a cohesive world overwhelmingly white and united by a common belief in a religious and moral code based on Judeo-Christian inheritance, an ordered society in which virtue is normal and crime an aberration. That world she described is the world which also helped create a subgenre known as religious mysteries. We think immediately of G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown stories published in 1911. Religious mysteries were often written by priests, ministers, nuns, and rabbis. Their main characters were usually amateur detectives and were frequently also clergy persons. What they have in common is the belief in God. In The Stillborn God by Mark Lida, the author describes three concepts of God. One concept is the transcendent God of the Hebrew Bible, alone in heaven, above the world, but approachable. He is the creator God who made the world good and made man and woman in his own image. He is also the God capable of creating floods, famine, and approving the slaughter of the enemy. The God of the Christian Bible may not be a cruel God, but is also a transcendent God who is active in history and in the lives of believers. It is the transcendent God we encounter in these and other mystery novels, but especially in the religious mysteries. It has been said of Chesterton's Father Brown that over and over again, the logic of the story involves a theological observation, usually a Catholic one, that matches something in the secular world. Father Brown's innocence and naivete is in contrast to the worldly wise police inspector who would like all the good father to get out of his way so he can get on with the cerebral practice of abduction. It is Chesterton's transcendent God who helps Father Brown learn the truth. Some other examples of this subgenre are Ralph McNerney's Father Dowling, the novels of Andrew Greeley, a Catholic priest, Ellis Peters' Putter Cadfield, and Sharon McNewman's Catherine de la Condure, a novice nun who is a contemporary of Abelard and Heloise. These are but a few of the religious novels in which we expect to find the concept of the transcendent God. Likewise, there is an assumption of the existence of God in the Rabbi Small novels of Harry Kellerman and Faye Kellerman's novels involving the hard-boiled detective Peter Decker, who converts to Orthodox Judaism in order to marry a woman of that faith. In both these novels, Jewish beliefs and practices are strictly observed. Although Buddhism is not a theistic religion, that faith does feature in the novels of Eliot Patterson. Set in Tibet, the symbols and practices of that country's Buddhism play a large part in the solving of the mysteries. Howard Fast, writing under the pseudonym E.V. Cunningham, created the character of Detective Masato, who is a Zen Buddhist and is a faithful follower of that religion as he goes about solving crimes in Los Angeles. In England, there are two women novelists whose Anglican background have informed the novels they wrote. Dorothy Sayers was a graduate of Oxford, a medievalist scholar who wrote books on theology, as well as a number of mysteries involving Lord Peter Wimsey. With the help of his good man Bunter, he identifies the killer in 11 novels and several short stories, and then suffers remorse and depression, realizing he has sent the killer to the gallows. P.D. James' novels indicate she is more than a little familiar with the tenets of Anglicanism and is very aware of that church's polity and its struggles in recent years. In her novel, A Case for Death, 2 bodies are found in the vestry of an Anglican church. In Death and Holy Orders, Inspector Dalgleish investigates murders which occur in an Anglican seminary. The events in this book indicate that that church is concerned with a loss of membership, difficulty in recruiting new priests, and theological disputes among the clergy. In America, where Anglicans are Episcopalians, Julia Spencer Fleming has written a number of novels about a woman priest assigned the pastorate in a small New England town. During the course of this series, the Reverend Clara Ferguson deals with fractious congregants as well as a crisis of faith. She also breaks the 10th commandment by coveting another woman's husband, who is the town police chief and the man she assists in solving crimes. In all of these novels, there is an assumption that God does exist and is involved in the lives of the characters we meet. At the end of one of James' novels, when the murderer has been apprehended, one of the characters says to Commander Dalglish, "The justice of man has been served, but what about the justice of God?" If there is one hard and fast rule of writing mysteries, it is that good must always overcome evil, and there must be justice. There are, however, some novels where the murder is motivated by vengeance, when there seems to be some justification for the murder. That seems to me to be the case in one of P.D. James' novels, in which, in the final scene, the murderer dies by walking into the sea, and the detective involved does nothing to prevent this suicide. Was men's justice served in this case? According to Catholic belief, such suicide is also a sin, and therefore God's justice is not realized either. This brings us to the subject of sin as a concept found in all mystery novels, most particularly the sin of murder, and how the depiction of that concept has changed. Consider the character of Holmes' nemesis Moriarty, pure evil. It is never suggested to the reader that he had any redeeming qualities, nor are we told that he is psychologically damaged by some horrendous childhood trauma. He does bad things because he's bad. The novels of the Golden Age provided motives for evil acts and also provided a victim who, in some cases, richly deserved his or her fate. In one of Agatha Christie's most popular novels, And Then There Were None, all 10 victims have been invited to the island by the mysterious and absent U.N. Owen. All guests are there because they have been involved somehow in the death of another person. And Owen, the unknown host, kills each in turn. The reader can have little sympathy for any of this lot. The characters in Christie's novels are never particularly realistic. The murderers and victims are pretty interchangeable. Christie does not let us care much for either, and certainly doesn't allow us into the minds of the murderers, with one exception, a novel in which the narrator is the murderer, although we won't find that out until the end of the book. On this subject, Dorothy Sayers wrote, "It, the mystery novel, rarely touches on the heights and depths of human passion. It presents us only with a fait accompli, and looks upon death and mutilation with a dispassionate eye. It does not show us the inner workings of the murderer's mind. It must not, for the identity of the murderer is hidden until the end of the book. It is in this dispassionate eye, this whodunit tradition, that we find the greatest change in detective fiction. The view of evil found in this tradition was overthrown by the psychological mystery, a subgenre which began to appear in the latter part of the 20th century. In these novels, we are allowed into the minds and activities of the murderer, usually in the opening scene. The motivation is most often retribution, driven by the deadly sin of wrath, a hatred which springs from a deeply damaged personality. In the course of the novel, we will learn what event or events in that person's life led to such sin. We are allowed to see the murderer as being mentally ill and may even have some sympathy for him or her while being repulsed by their heinous acts. Can we really condemn them, and can we require that they be brought to justice? No mystery I have read in recent years deals with this dilemma better than U.C. Alder Olson's The Purity of Vengeance. Her detective, Paul Mark, heads the Copenhagen Police Division, which investigates cold cases. When he and his colleagues are asked to look into the disappearance of several individuals who went missing one weekend, they uncover the story of a woman who was treated brutally in her youth 30 years earlier. The author gives her readers every reason to feel that her vengeance is well justified. And when we learn that she is dying of cancer and when she ends her life, we feel pity for her rather than for her victims. Many of the early novels had amateurs or licensed private investigators making fools of the abysmally stupid police officers by solving the crimes while the police stumbled around in the dark. But a groundbreaking new series introduced in 1965 by the Swedish couple Elrod and Elrod changed the nature of the genre forever. I made no claim for that pronunciation. This couple, partners in life as well as in writing, established as a subgenre the police procedural mystery, which had been introduced by Ed McBain in America. They were both Marxist and members of the Communist Party. No doubt they viewed all religion as an opiate of the people. They were critics of Swedish society and politics. Their novels reflected this and established a new level of realism in detective fiction. The main character, Mark Beck, leads a team of police investigators, all of whom are fully realized characters who develop and experience changes in their lives over the series. Beck sees his marriage disintegrate, as well as his relationship with his son. He falls ill at times, especially with bad colds. Added to the realism of this series are very specific locations. They can even be found on a map. A feature which sets this series and others which followed, apart from those of the Golden Age, is the character of the protagonist. In Miss Marple, Lord Peter, and Father Brown, we see self-satisfied individuals, confident in their detective skills, and generally happy with their lives. In contrast, the investigators in these more naturalistic novels had a myriad of problems of their own, such as fondness for alcohol, unhappy marriages, loneliness, dishonest or incompetent officers serving with them, plus long working hours, lack of sleep, and poor eating habits. In other words, these later detectives are allowed to indulge in any of the 7 deadly sins. The Mark Beck novels led the way for the current wave of novels from Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, collectively known as Scandinavian noir. These novels are sometimes very dark indeed, but written by such talented writers. They may be viewed as literary fiction, which just happens to focus on murders and police investigations. Probably the most popular of these are the novels of Henning Mankell, whose Inspector Wallander became even more popular with the BBC series starring Kenneth Branagh. The countries represented in this group are probably even more secular than Canada, and we do not expect to find very much Christian theology in them. But they are as humanitarian and moralistic as any, and many contain concepts ripe for theological musings. In Norway's Karen Foss's novel, The Water's Edge, Inspector Sayar attends the funeral of a young victim and considers his own feelings which arise in the church as he contemplates the beauty of the vaulted ceiling, the stained glass windows, and the comfort of the environment. Quote, "He was not an atheist, far from it, but neither had he ever believed there was a God, externally or inside him. He had no awareness of any spiritual power. Of course, he had experienced some glimpses of spirituality, moments which lifted him up and out of himself, moments that broke barriers when he suddenly sensed something greater, like opening a curtain to let in the light. You see, Inspector Sayar is a Unitarian at heart. In Louise Penny's recent novel, Beautiful Mystery, Chief Inspector Armand Gamache of the Quebec Surrey is sent to investigate the murder of a monk in a very isolated, closed monastery in northern Quebec, located on a lake and accessible only by float plane or motorboat. Here, 24 monks are the caretakers of what is probably the only remaining copy of centuries-old Gregorian chants, probably the first to be written. It and the chants are considered sacred by the monks. Penny's novel provides a range of theological concepts, some Christian church history, the nature of plain songs and how they were used in worship, and the dead monk, as well as dead suspects, monk suspects. Because no visitors are allowed in the monastery, the perpetrator must be another monk. But what could possibly be the motivation? When the monks realized that their centuries-old building had to have costly repairs, they made a CD of their chants, which became very popular. When a new recording is being considered, a murder is committed. The motivation is not the usual lust, greed, or jealousy. It is to prevent what one monk considers to be a blasphemy. Since the Martin Beck novels were first published in Sweden and then translated into English, the genre has changed and become more international. We are able to read very well-written murder mysteries set in France, Italy, and Germany, in India and Tibet, Japan, and even Botswana. The trend toward more realistic characters, more vivid murders, a larger number of serial killers, police procedurals, and psychological mysteries. All of these can be seen in English novels by Ian Rankin, Val McDermott, Francis Fifield, Elizabeth George, and of course P.D. James. The concept of free will has been accepted in all major religions, and especially in the Catholic faith, Christian faith. For many centuries, all justice systems are based on that concept. Michio Kaku, in his recent work, The Future of the Mind, points out that as neuroscientists learn more and more about the brain and its functions, the very existence of free will is put into question. Certain behaviors can be linked to precise defects of the brain or brain damage, and a person may not be scientifically responsible for crimes committed. If a brain anomaly prevents a person from feeling empathy, is guilt possible? Can there be contrition and absolution? No doubt Father Brown believed that by hearing confessions or administering the last rites, he was providing absolution and the assurance of salvation in the afterlife. But what of man's justice? Joe Nesbo's most recent novel, The Son, is probably the most theologically rich novel I have ever read, filled with Christian symbolism. The detective is sitting in a church considering the question of free will. I quote, "Did that mean he, the murderer, or anyone have free will? Wouldn't we all, given the same mathematical equation, the same odds, the same probability of what paid off, make the same choices over and over, determined by the chemical substances in your brain, available information, survival instinct, mortal fear, learned morality, and the herd instinct? We don't punish people because they are evil, but because they have made bad choices that are bad for the herd. I will leave it to you to ponder the question of the existence of free will." In the mystery novels we read today, we rarely encounter the concepts of resurrection and immortality. To discuss these concepts, I will have to stretch the point a bit. Of course, Sherlock Holmes did die in that fall over Richenbach Falls, but Conan Doyle had to resurrect him due to popular demand. Other novelists have chosen to kill off their main characters. Both Oxford's Inspector Morse and Man Kills Wallander were allowed peaceful deaths. Nicholas Freeland killed his Dutch Inspector Van der Valk in mid-novel, leaving it to the detective's wife to solve the murder of her husband in the second half of the book. Others, such as P.D. James and Louise Penny, have chosen to end their series with retirement of their characters. Thanks to television, movies, and Netflix, some of our favorite detectives appear to have immortality. Sherlock Holmes has had a number of reincarnations over the years, and recently he and Watson appear to be getting younger. They have even learned to use computers and cell phones, a miracle indeed. Characters from both mystery and spy thrillers can also take on new lives after the death of their creators. Jill Patton Welch is writing new Lord Peter Wimsey novels. I consider that a sacrilege, if not an actual sin. Man Booker winner John Manville, who has written a number of mysteries under the pseudonym Benjamin Black, has resurrected Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe with his latest novel, proving you can't keep a good man down. I enjoy considering the lives of some of these favorite characters, deceased or retired. I like to think that Miss Marple is still tending her roses and knitting sweaters. For her endless supply of nephews, that Wallander's still eating badly and falling asleep in his chair, that Endeavor Morris is working crossword puzzles, drinking his single malt whiskey and listening to Wagner, that Adam Dalgliesh is happily married to Professor Emma Loveman and has resumed writing poetry, and that Armand Beaumarchais and his wife are living in the house they bought in Three Oaks and are enjoying the company of some of the mystery novel's most fascinating characters. May they all continue to enjoy good lives, and may I continue to discover excellent novelists who just happen to write detective fiction, which rewards the readers with much more than simple whodunits. Maybe even contain a bit of theology. To quote Nathaniel Booth in his 2011 blog, there are very few things so innately religious as the detective's call for us to take a closer look at our mundane world and seek to discern clues that might point to a better way of living.